Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Esselman. I'm head of product at Doc Labs, where our team works on the Truvera platform for digital identity. Today, I'm joined by Agni Kant from our product team. Our topic today is the European Union Digital Identity Wallet that's launching at the end of the year, next few quarters. We'll see when it happens when it really starts to roll out for real. I think it's going to change the world. User-controlled digital identity has never been adopted at the scale that the European Union is trying to do with the EUDI project. Now, it's easy to get a really high level of EUDI. There are a lot of blog posts that kind of give you a general idea of the top concepts, the goals. But learning more requires looking at the standards, looking at the regulations, reading a bunch of discussion threads, going to conferences, looking at the pilot requirements. There's a gap in the middle information for people that want a practical guide. They want to get below the marketing level and get to actually what's involved, but don't want to dig through the architectural reference framework, the ARF. So, and then once you figured it all out, staying current, it's a very fast-moving topic. So our goal today is to save you that effort by summarizing what we've learned. Now, Europe is blazing this path that's already being used as a model for other countries. I'm an American. Unfortunately, I'm a little jealous of Europeans. You get this comprehensive digital identity. I'm still waiting for mine. But I do have customers around the world that are asking me how EUDI works, how they interoperate with it, how they can use it in their business, how they're going to work across jurisdiction. And so that's caused me to follow it from the beginning. And then, of course, Agni, you get to actually use this in practice. So Agni's very motivated to figure it out. Now, as always, we appreciate our live audience joining with us. The comment section is always really informative. I hope you introduce yourself, tell us where you're joining from, say hello. I hope that some EUDI experts are on this call. I know that you've joined our webinars in the past. Please feel free to share your experiences. Agni and I were talking about, are we the right experts to do this? Well, there's a gap. I think we're the right experts because we're not so involved in the day-to-day and we can help distill this for the rest of the world. But like they say, the way to find out the truth is to confidently post something wrong on the internet. So we're here saying the way we understand EUDI to be working, and if you find that there's something wrong, please do correct us in the chat, and we'll bring that into the conversation. We can do follow-up webinars as well. We've appreciated the people who've joined us in previous webinars and helped us be educated on this topic, and now we're helping spread that knowledge to the world. So with that little bit of intro, Agni, why don't you introduce yourself and share a bit about what brings you to the topic, and then you can start sharing our understanding of the current status of the European Union digital identity.
Thanks, Richard. So it's very nice to do something at such a low bar, like being wrong is great. So for everyone else. So before we dive in, I think everyone who followed us before, they know I'm a product owner here at Doc. I'm from Europe, so full disclosure, I'm a big supporter of EUDI, and I have a very good reason for it. I tell these stories internally quite often. So I have recently moved from Lithuania to Greece, and theoretically it shouldn't be very complicated because we have this freedom of movement within the EU for the citizens. But in reality, in order to live here, I have to deal with the banks, with the government institutions, and they don't seem to care much about the freedom of movement part so much. They care about their own bureaucratic procedures. So last week, this is a very, very fresh example, I went to the local bank because I want to close my bank account, just to close it, not to open a new one. I want to close my bank account. And they refused to do it online. They refused to do it on the call. So I physically walked into a local bank branch, and in order to close my bank account, they asked me to bring not just my passport, I had that with me, but they also asked for my phone bill, they asked for an electricity bill, and for my job contract. I had a bit of a discussion with the teller asking, like, why do you need all of this information? And her answer is just, this is just what we need, only to close the bank account. So for me, thinking about EUDI, at the end of 2027, the bank will have to accept my digital identity as a proof of identification. So I was actually even thinking, maybe I'll keep my bank account, doesn't cost me anything, and I'll come back at the end of next year, and they will have to close the account without my job contract. So with this in mind, I want to share with everyone a bit more on what this session is about. It's not just sharing my personal stories, but over the past few months, we've been going deep on EUDI. We're reading the legislation, we're tracking the implementing acts, and of course talking to people building in the ecosystem and participating in the industry conversations. There's quite a few going around. So what we want to do today is share the summary of what we've learned, and of course, like, it's not every detail. So we'll cover how the ecosystem is structured, what actually matters versus what's noise, and what practical steps you can take today or you can plan to take tomorrow. What we won't do today is talk through every specification or every member state or discuss use cases beside credential exchange. Those are we're the expert of, but there's other use cases like e-signatures, e-archiving, or registered delivery, and we leave those for the professionals in those spheres as well. We'll have a Q&A at the end, I think Richard mentioned, but I always like to ask people to put the questions as they go throughout. We have the wizard behind the curtain, Francisco. He keeps track of everything, and we'll make sure that all of the questions get answered one way or the other. If not in the webinar, in the email afterwards. So with this, let's start with regulation. Not a lot, just briefly. So, because everything else flows from it, right? So, eIDAS has existed since 2014. It gave us a framework for electronic ID and trust services across the EU, and it worked reasonably well for government-to-citizen transactions. But adoption stayed low, cross-border use was limited, and the private sector largely stayed away. So the 2024 revision, which is what people mean when they say eIDAS 2 now, it changes that. And every member state has to make a wallet available. The wallet has to be free for citizens, voluntary to use, and interoperable across all 27 countries, which sounds amazing. Verifiers can't share identifying data back with the issuers, which is like the privacy shift here, and the trust is anchored in government-managed list of qualified providers. So this is the backbone of everything else we'll talk about today, and the big differences. So as going further, I think one of the things that make EUDI hard to get your head around, just one of the things, there's quite a few, but one of them is that it's not one thing, right? So there's 3 layers working together. Like in any identity project, there's business, legal, and technical, or the BLT, like the sandwich. Richard likes to, it's an American sandwich. I don't know if Europeans are familiar with it. I think they are. We have borrowed, by the way, this metaphor from Drummond Reed, but I really like it, so I like to use it and put it in our slides as well. So when we talk about eIDAS, so the legal layer is the eIDAS 2 plus national implementing acts. So each member state is writing them now. And the business layer is the registration and certification process. So who gets to be a trust service provider, who gets to be a relying party, and which wallets are certified. The technical layer is the specification, so the architecture reference framework, or ARF. If I say ARF, it's just because I get tired of saying architecture reference framework, and the credential formats, so the certificate registries, verification infrastructure as well. And all 3 of them have to line up for the ecosystem to function. So when people say EUDI is complicated, I think this is what usually what they mean. So a useful mental model when reading anything about EUDI is to ask which of these 3 layers you're actually looking at, right? Which, with that frame in mind, you can actually decide what you're talking about, right? So, and now we can actually see what flows through the ecosystem, and I want to talk about everything step by step.
One comment on the BLT before you move on. It's interesting that some of the concerns people raise about EUDI is that it didn't innovate enough in the technical side. And I think, you know, the reputation of Europe is innovative regulation. And I think a lot of the thinking into EUDI goes into that legal governance and that business governance to make sure that the trust models and the liability models are well understood, and they're being fairly conservative in the technologies they're adopting. They're introducing this user wallet and having user controlled identity, which is great. But some of the other things we'd like to see, they're being very careful about. They're sticking with X509 keys, for instance, because it works. And so as you look at EUDI, I think it was very helpful for me to get that lens of, oh yeah, they did all this cool stuff on the legal and business side. The technology side, they're really trying to stay with what already works instead of inventing too much new stuff.
But I think in the way that it really makes sense, like the technology has been there already, like there's always a new thing to implement. But if you have something working, and as I said, like the legal and the business side is really, really new. It's the first project of this scale. So maybe it makes sense to start with the technology that's already trusted and then as needed, change it as it go further, right? Okay, so now let's talk about credentials. So when talking about EUDI credentials, there's also three types. And the difference here also matters. So first, there's the PID, the person identification data. So this is the digital equivalent of a national ID card, and only a government or an entity mandated by a government can issue it. And it's what provides who you are for high assurance use cases, like opening a bank account, for example, maybe in Greece for closing a bank account as well, but like I said, a different story, right? Second, the QEAAs, qualified electronic attestation of attributes. You can think of these as officially recognized claims about you. So it's a driver's license, a diploma, professional qualification. They have to be issued by a qualified trust service provider, which is supervised and audited role under eIDAS. And third, the EAAs. So these are non-qualified electronic attestations, and any organization can issue these. So a loyalty card, an employer badge, the membership credential. So it's a much lighter regulatory burden, but it's also less legal weight. So most conversations, when you talk about UDI, they collapse these three together, especially if it's like high-level conversations, and I think it causes a lot of confusions. So when our customers ask, like, can we issue credentials in UDI? My answer is usually, sure, but which credentials are you talking about, right? And if we go a layer down from the credential type, so then we have a question of the platform and the format. So for PIDs and QEAAs, the format, it's not optional. So they have to be issued in the formats that the architecture reference framework, the ARF, specifies. It has to be either SD-JWT VC or mdoc. And they have to be issued with government or QTSP supervision. And that's what makes them recognizable across the entire ecosystem. Non-qualified EAAs, they have more flexibility. They can be issued in the same UDI format, so like it does not exclude them, but, and it's important if you want to have good interoperability with UDI. But because they're not tied to the qualified trust framework, they can also be issued through other platforms and using other formats. And that's great because it really depends on the use case. So that opens the door to things the UDI regulation does not cover today. Like credential exchange between separate ecosystems or alternative privacy preserving formats or monetization of credentials as well. So these are the use cases that the ARF hasn't addressed yet. And I think the point to take away here is that it's not the list of formats, it's that issuing a credential and issuing an EUDI-compliant credential aren't always the same decision, I think, and which one you need depends on whether interoperability with the government wallet matters, or the other things that I mentioned, like the privacy preserving, the monetization part. It all depends on the use case, and they can also play very nicely together.
So if your goal is, I want everybody to be able to read this credential, then using one of the standard formats makes a lot of sense. But if your goal is a specific use case, a specific ecosystem, specific privacy concerns, then having that least common denominator EU-wide format might not meet that need. And that's when looking at one of these unregulated private platforms would make more sense. Is that a fair way to look at it?
That's exactly how I see it, I think. Yeah. everyone has a way to do what they want to do, like it doesn't negate. Okay, so now we talked about the credentials. Now my favorite part is the wallets. So and I think with the wallet part, this is also where a lot of confusion happens. I was confused at first as well, because when you talk UDI wallet, and you usually assume one thing, so that's the wallet where you have your PID. But actually, there's two categories of wallets here, and the way to look at it, I think, in the easier way, there's state wallets. And those are the ones that the regulation actually requires. So each member state has to provide at least one official state wallet. It will have to be certified against the EU scheme. And this is the wallet that can carry your national ID. Private wallets, however, they're anything else, and they're built on the same standards. But a bank can build one, a telco can build one, like we build them as well. And private wallets, they can't carry PIDs, that's reserved for the states, and that's fine. But they can carry the qualified and non-qualified attestations, depending on what the issuer is willing to issue into them. So importantly, I think users also can hold as many as they want. So like the users are not limited just having a state wallet or just having one private wallet. I think lots of people will have both, and actually maybe even multiple private wallets, because it will be professional, there will be business credentials. And I think it's also here important to mention that when I say wallet, I also don't usually mean a standalone wallet application. We talk about this throughout our webinars. I think when we talk about the wallet, we technically mean that it's a wallet, but it can be embedded in already existing applications. So if you have already one, it doesn't have to be on your mobile either, right? So for the user perspective, like they don't have to think about it as a wallet at all. It's just their identity going through a certain use case with their service provider of sorts.
So the public wallet, the state wallet, that'll be a standalone app, but private wallets, like you said, can be embedded. We have the cloud. We've got a bunch of other webinars that go into details about how to build a private wallet if you're interested. But this is really interesting, Agni, because when you went to the DICE conference a couple weeks ago and got an update on things, there was all that conversation about QEAAs and where they can be held. My understanding is that some jurisdictions were saying they didn't want QEAAs to be in the private wallets because it comes from the qualified issuer and it's government regulated. But others were saying, no, the public wallet should only contain the PID, the personal identity data, and shouldn't identification data, and should not contain the QEAs. That should go somewhere else. So I know that's been a topic of conversation. Where should QEAs live? How much does the wallet need to be certified in order to trust the QEA? But based on what you heard at DICE, it sounds like they will allow them. Most jurisdictions are settling on allowing them in both places.
I think to say most would be just my opinion. It's very hard to put quantitative in any of these answers, but based on the conversation we saw, it's exactly like you said. So countries see their wallets very differently. So for example, when France was presenting theirs, they were talking that only the PID should go, maybe some like very high level official documents could be, but not necessarily. And I really like the joke about the Denmark wallet. They call it like the vending machine for relying parties. Like they want everything to be included. Like if it makes sense for the citizen to store their credentials in the official wallet, why shouldn't they? So I think it will be a lot of variation, but at the same time, I think it doesn't matter what the state wallets decide, it's going to be different. For the private wallets in the regulation, there shouldn't be any limitation. That's kind of the whole point, that you keep the PIDs in the state wallets, but you want to leave the QEAs and EAs as free as possible for the market to build their own. Like I think all are striving for adoption. So on the very high level, I think that's the rule. It might change, and this is one of those things. If someone has different information and I'm okay to be wrong, just let us know. I don't think it's easy to say like a general rule for everyone yet.
Hey, Rishab and Pierce both asked about Google and Apple and Samsung. How do you think their wallets fit in?
Oh, this is funny. So again, going back to that conference, we had like really good research presented by a team in Italy. I don't remember the exact name of the organization. So they did research in 5 countries. It was like Italy, France, Spain, UK, and Germany, asking what people think about the big tech wallets, because we know that from the government perspective, from the legal perspective in EU, we don't necessarily want the big tech to provide and to touch our government identities, but when they ask the people, I think in a lot of countries, I think Italy was maybe the exception. They had less than 30% people would be comfortable with that. But in other countries, people are almost as comfortable storing their identity documents in the big tech wallets as in the government wallets. So I think we have this discussion with Richard quite often, who should be guiding it. I think in this case, like I'm on the European spectrum, I'd rather put my government wallet and my government ID in my government wallet than in my Google wallet. But I think having the option how to do it for everyone, that's also not necessarily a bad thing.
And the key to recognize is that the certification process, each state will have their own wallet certification process. So some states are much more comfortable with big tech, largely American big tech, Google, Apple, Samsung. Other states are very hesitant. So France has already said, we will not use Apple, Google, and Samsung, but others are more willing. So Pierce asked the question, has there been an effort made? Yes. I've been told that all 3 of those wallet providers are lobbying to have their wallets be accepted by the certification scheme, but it's going to be done on a state-by-state basis. And each state, like Italy, will choose where they put their PIDs, and that'll be and that could be different from Estonia, for instance. So we're definitely seeing that. Now, it's interesting. The big tech wallets, they support the ISO MDL. Google has said they plan to support SD-JWTs. I don't know about Samsung came on our podcast, but I don't remember asking them that question. But so them holding the PID they expect to be able to hold the PID. Ellen asked, is passport an example of a PID? Absolutely. Personal identifying data is the passport, is maybe the tax card, is the mobile driver's license. Those are the 3 examples people use the most. So Google and Apple and Samsung, they should be able to hold that ISO MDL or that ISO mdoc passport. There's an open question about how much they want to hold the QEAAs and the EAAs. Apple, for instance, seems to be very specific about what kind of credentials they want to hold. They don't want to be general purpose. Google used to say they expect all general purpose credentials to be pushed to a third-party wallet using the Digital Credentials API. But now they're saying, well, maybe we do want to hold actual SD-JWT. If we're implementing SD-JWTs in order to hold PIDs, then maybe we let people hold every kind of QEAA in the Google Wallet. So we see that evolving strategically. So the key message for this kind of high-level overview is wallet certification is on a state-by-state basis. They're still figuring it out, but the government's going to pick where the PID goes, and EAAs can be whatever the citizen wants to use, and the QEAA will depend on that certification scheme, and probably will be going to the private wallet based on what Agni learned recently. I think I captured a few questions in there, so if you have follow-up questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Perfect. But I will continue because I have quite a few slides left and I would like to go through them all. So now this is the diagram again, and this is it's finished, it's complete. And this is where I want to show like where a technology provider like Truvera, for example, can help for people saying like, how do we participate in the EUDI? So of course, not in the issuance of the PID column. That's, like we said, is a government role by regulation. That's not where we play, but on the verification side of PID, for example. So technology providers can help relying parties consume and verify PIDs, and will help. There will be lots of needs for that. We know that already. And also other credentials that are presented from the state wallets as well. And on the issuance side, so in issuing qualified attestations in partnership with a qualified, you have to partner with a qualified trust service provider for this likely, and also issuing or verifying non-qualified attestations directly. So there's not a lot of regulation around those. Just need to have the correct formats, right? And on the wallet side, so technology providers can provide the private wallet options for organizations. especially the ones that don't want to build the wallet from scratch. And why I wanted to show this diagram and to show where the wallet fits in, because I think in a lot of places, so the practical decisions in the second half of the session, they come down to two questions. So which column are you in or you want to be in, and which row you want to operate at? So a technology provider can be one route to answering some of those questions instead of building everything yourself.
In the chat, Ha asks, why would a person have a private wallet versus the state wallet?
So I think the best answer for that would be if you want to issue additional credentials. As we said, like state wallets, it's going to be a very, very hard regulatory path to go there. You have to be registered in the country, you have to certify, the state has to notify the commission that it's an official state wallet, so there's a lot of things to do. But if you're a bank, for example, so you might want to verify the PID, but you care about your bank identity, your customer credentials, and this can be applied for any kind of business. So I think there's a lot of reasons. Like I said, I'm a wallet product owner, so of course I'm biased, but I think almost every organization could have a wallet and maybe even should for their customers, because there's lots of use cases for that.
And the example you gave a minute ago, the other reason is that UX experience. That state wallet is going to have a very specific experience. If you want a cloud experience, a custodial experience, an embedded in your mobile, in your telephone app experience, then you're going to have a separate wallet for holding that identity data.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now I only have one slide on the standards. This could be much more, but I want to kind of explain the main acronyms, because I've been talking about them in the webinar here as well, and I think it's helpful to understand what each of them is doing and where it sits, but I also don't want to bore everyone to death, so I'm going to try to make it quite fast. So for protocols, the wallet talks to issuers using OpenID for VC, and the verifier is using OpenID for VP. And both of those are profiled by HAIP, the High Assurance Interoperability Profile, which tightens those already existing protocols. So interesting fact here, I thought when I was doing my research that HAIP was created specifically for UDI, but Richard corrected me, and I think he knows the real story behind it, so maybe he can share it with everyone here.
Well, let me tell that as you finish the slide, if that's okay. It ties into a few pieces, yeah.
Okay. It just means that Richard wants to talk longer and doesn't want to interrupt my flow, so that's fine as well. So if we go through the rest of the slide, so for the rest, for the credentials themselves, so there's two formats we already said. This is SD-JWT VC, which is JSON based, and then there's mdoc, which is CBOR based and comes from the ISO mobile driving license standard that's familiar to people from US. Depending on your role and the credential type, you might need to support one or likely probably both standards as well. For trust, the verification relies on EU trusted list and X509 access certificates issued to registered participants. And for onboarding, so when a citizen first gets their wallet, there's ETCS 119.461, which governs how their identity is verified. So my main point here is like, don't need to memorize any of this. I think what matters is that these are all existing name standards, and EUDI is combining them, but it's not inventing something new from scratch. And now Richard's story time.
Yes, it's interesting to see how these technology decisions evolved. At EIC in Germany last in 2025, and most of these standards were not accepted yet. So the implementing acts were passed, and we had the deadline of end of 2026 to have the EUDI ready. We meaning the ecosystem, but the ISO MDL format 18013-7 for remote attestation was not approved yet. OpenID standard, OpenID for verifiable credential standard wasn't approved yet, and the HAIP that was part of that wasn't finalized yet. So they were all drafts. And so Gail Hodges, the head of OpenID, she talked in a panel about that challenge of, okay, we've got to get The HAIP agreed, so it can get put into OpenID for VC, so it can be embedded in ISO so that we can finish the ARF for EUDI. And so they were trying to get all these done at the same time. So we do see that ISO 18013 does refer to the OpenID exchange protocol, and it refers to the HAIP because all these standards were completed kind of together. Now, it's interesting also to see what's missing on this list. So we're using the ITF SD-JWT VC format, which is not, it's very similar to the W3C JSON-LD format, but it's not the same. So Pat was asking about, is RDF required? The W3C JSON-LD standard, and Agni, you're going to stop me because we don't want to go into too much detail on the standards, like you said. But there was a big fight over whether W3C VCs should include JSON-LD and be RDF compatible, or whether it should be the simpler JWT format. And W3C decided on including the context annotation and the RDF capabilities in JSON-LD. The EUDI architects that put together the ARF, the Architectural Reference Framework, they did not they preferred to not include all the JSON-LD RDF stuff. So obviously it's a JWT, you can do some RDF stuff, but it doesn't have the full tooling to do all the RDF capabilities. That said, a lot of RDF concepts do apply. You're using schemas, you're using formats that are well understood, but they decided deliberately to not adopt the JSON-LD. I'm a big fan of the W3C JSON standards is a general rule, and I'm disappointed by that a bit. Similarly, they're not using W3C DIDs. There's no decentralized key management. All the key management is done in that X509 certificate infrastructure. In December, we had Mirko from Sprind on our podcast, and he was explaining some of the reason for that. The main reason is because it exists. They're already doing a lot of innovation here. They've got a short time frame. Let's use X509s to work. Let's not innovate with DIDs and do this new thing. Architecturally, I'm sympathetic to that. I wish there was more decentralization. I hope they do that in the future. But for now, they're not using blockchain. They're not using DIDs. They're using X509s. And then similarly, the other one that keeps coming up, people ask us, well, what about zero-knowledge proofs? What about non-correlation? What about being able to give that range proof of age? They decide that cryptography is not approved by SOGIS, which is the EU ETSI organization that does cryptography. So they couldn't use it. They just said, look, the cryptography, they haven't changed their cryptography standards since 2018, I believe. They're working on an update. Maybe after they do the update, we can have some of these nice new capabilities in EUDI. But for now, they said they're going to solve that problem with batch issuance. So when the issuer issues like an age credential, they'll give you lots of age credentials, over 13, over 16, over 18, over 22. They're still figuring out what these are, over 65. They're figuring out exactly the brackets they're going to use. But that's how they'll allow that, so you don't have to have that zero knowledge range proof. And then they'll issue you more than one copy of each credential, so that if you're worried about correlatability by the verifier looking at the credentials coming from having the same internal identifiers, you'll have multiple copies you can use to make it harder to do that tracking. So those are some of the things that are kind of missing. Me as an identity guy, I see that gap, but I can see the architectural trade-off they're making, which is, let's get something to market. Let's get it by the end of the year. Nice.
Thank you, Richard. I will continue. I'm sure you could talk about this more, but that can make a great LinkedIn post, right? Okay. Before we move into the practical session, I want to do an honest assessment of what's still moving, which I think everyone recognizes quite a lot, but like to name a few. So I think the first, the wallet certification scheme, it's still being finalized by ENISA, which is the EU Cybersecurity Agency. There's a draft in public review right now, and the final version is expected later this year. The relying party registration, it exists in the regulation, but the operational process is being defined member state by member state. So what it looks like in Germany, it's not identical to what it looks in France, or like theoretically, it will not necessarily be identical. The cross-border trust, so meaning a verifier in Spain checking a credential issued in Poland, It works in principle, but the operational plumbing is also still being built out. The role of intermediaries, which I think is very interesting, so those are the organizations that help others participate without going through the full registration process themselves, especially for relying parties. It's written into the regulation, but the implementation details are open, so it could potentially vary in different countries. My point here is that when you read something about EUDI, you need to check the date, because everything is still moving. Like when I started making the slides, I checked something later, and apparently last few weeks something else changed. So you always need to check the date and make sure that you're looking at the most recent updates. And having said that, now I want to move in the practical steps. So to frame the next well, it was intended to be the next half of the session, and let's see, the next 15 minutes, next 20 minutes, I want to maybe leave some time for questions at the end. So, as I said, a lot of people approach EUDI asking, like, so how do we become a recognized wallet, or how do we get into the ecosystem, as if it's like one thing, as one closed ecosystem, and that you need like a special key for. And I think it's more useful to think of it as like two very different places. So governments, they have claimed exactly one thing for themselves: identity documents, PID, and they can only be issued by a member state or an entity it explicitly mandates. And it can only be held in the official wallet that the state has certified. So that's not going to open up to private companies, likely. And honestly, that's also by design. So the idea here, I think, is that identity is anchored by government grade assurance. And everything else in this ecosystem is explicitly built to be open to the market. I recognize this can be a debate, but the high level idea, I think it's that. And it's just different levels of regulation depending on what you're doing. It's EU, we have to regulate, right? So the qualified attestations, the QEAAs, they're open to any organization that's willing to become a QTSP, the Qualified Trust Service Provider, or partner with one. That's heavily audited and a regulated path, but it's not government always, so it's possible. And non-qualified attestations, so they're open to essentially anyone. It's a lighter regulatory touch, and private wallets, so that ones that can't carry PIDs, but they can carry everything else, they're open to anyone who builds to the IRF standards. So I think the real first question for any organization that want to get into EUDI is what you're actually trying to do. So there's 3 ways to participate. I'm not discouraging Richard you from talking. I just thought that you wanted to say something, but I'll give you a chance to talk. So there's 3 ways to participate. And I think most of the organizations will find themselves in one of these, maybe 2, not likely all 3 scenarios, but I guess it's not impossible, right? So in short, a relying party want to accept EUDI credentials as a proof of something. So this role is defined by the Article 5B of eIDAS 2. As an issuer, you want to put credentials into people's wallet, and this is also governed by the Articles 45B through 45H for like attestations in general. As a wallet provider, you want to build the wallet itself, and that's governed by Article 5A for the core functionality and Article 5C for certification. So those, of course, are not mutually exclusive. Like we said, like a university, for example, could issue diplomas and also want to verify credentials presented back to it. But I think each path has quite a different registration process and different technical lift, and so I want to talk for them separately.
So it's expected that everybody's going to be a relying party. Like, we hope everybody's using EUDI credentials. It's probably unlikely that most companies are going to issue QTSP official credentials. And like you said, the wallet provider path is the expensive, difficult certification process. It's very unlikely somebody's going to follow the EUDI wallet provider path. Would you agree with that? So as we go through the conversation, that relying party part, everybody listen to: issuer, if you want to be a QTSP; wallet provider, if that's your specific business model, is kind of how we expect it to be adopted.
So I think if you're talking about the official wallet, yes, or QTSPs or PIDs are going to be issued by wallets. But as I said in the beginning, I think everyone should have a wallet because there's also the EAA. So and so everyone can issue credentials. So any business that has customers that want to do identity and okay, maybe not Joe's juice stand on the corner, although they have loyalty cards maybe, so that could be credentials as well. So I don't necessarily think that there should be less issuers or less wallets. They don't need to necessarily be the QTSPs or the official wallets. And then in those cases, I think their path is not necessarily that complicated as well.
That makes sense. And that's why you've been emphasizing that unregulated path for custom workflows, custom business processes. Tim asked, where do we see Truvera fitting into the ecosystem in relation to the state wallet and or the big tech wallets? And I think, like you said, is that customization need when you want a specific UX, when you want a specific flow, when you need your staff credential for, some inter-office requirement or travel credential where your goal isn't interoperating with the continent-wide EU ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. I'll mention Truvera a little bit, like if we're talking about the wallet on the wallet provider slide, and as a tech provider, we technically touch all of these paths as well. Okay, so for the relying party, so if you want to accept EUDI credentials, the path can look roughly like this. First, you register in a national register of wallet relying parties, and every member state must establish at least one such register. So there's also an alternative path of doing this, like I mentioned before, the Joe of the juice stand might not necessarily want to go for a complicated process to register. And also for smaller companies, it's going to be harder, right? So there's the role of an intermediary. And Article 5B of the eIDAS 2, it explicitly permits organizations to delegate the registration, certificate, and integration work to a third party who handles the relying party role on their behalf. So for smaller organizations or ones that don't want to build and maintain this integration themselves, this is often the most realistic path that we can see happening. So second, if you are registering directly as a relying party, the registrar runs you through a registration process and issues you a wallet relying party access certificate. And that's the mandatory piece. It's what your system presents to authenticate when requesting a presentation from the wallet. Third, you integrate on the technical side, and the integration work is guided by the ARF, and it's high profile, so it's the OpenID for VP and the credential formats SD-JWT VC and mdoc. And fourth, of course, you test, ideally against a pilot or sandbox wallet before productions, and we already know there's a few available. So Germany has one that's available. France has one as well. I think we shared some in various LinkedIn posts, and we can definitely share some after the webinar as well. So when talking about the relying party, I want to flag here that as everything in this webinar, like it is not set in stone yet. So what is certain is that registration mechanics are already set in the law, but the operational rollout, it's still ahead of us. So the countries are still, the member states will run their own registers and registrars. So exact process will vary country by country. That's what happens when you have a lot of countries involved, right?
And a lot of the decisions that are made about EUDI depend on this idea that relying parties register to access the scheme. We talked about how the 2014 eIDAS didn't get the adoption wanted. I'm kind of nervous that requiring verifiers to register their use cases will also prevent that broad adoption. It makes the system less flexible. It creates a bureaucratic burden. As an American, it just seems weird to tell the state what I want to consume. But the values that they're trying to protect make a lot of sense. By requiring the verifiers to register their use case, there's a legal avenue for the consumer or the state to enforce that the verifiers are using the data as expected. And so that they built that registration, the relying party registration in, so that when you share data when you share your PID with somebody, they're part of the government scheme. They're only going to use it for the approved purposes, and it can be enforced that they do that. So I understand the value that's part of that regulatory innovation, but I do worry about it becoming, inflexible. If I need to get something, if my boss says make this work by tomorrow, and it takes 3 weeks to get approved by the state register, then I'm going to have to use a private wallet. So that's part of the challenge. And I know Sprint is going to have a web interface that's going to be really slick, but we'll see if every jurisdiction can make it as slick as Germany does.
And I think that's exactly the reason for the role of intermediary to help these relying parties, because it is going to be hard. But as you said, like the role here, like we want to protect the privacy of individuals. So if you need some information that's like in your PID, you should be able to tell what you're going to use it for. So, it's different ways to do it. We'll see how it plays out later, right? Moving now to the issuer side. So for the issuer, the path splits very early, and I think it is based on the decision that you have to make. Are you issuing QEAAs or the EAs, the non-qualified attestations? If you want to issue QEAAs, the qualified attestations with the full legal weight, the requirements are in Article 45D, and you either need to become a qualified trust service provider yourself, or you need to partner with one. And you have to meet the QTSP requirements, which is also defined by law. And most organizations, I think, will take the partner route unless the credential issuance is core to their business, because it's not likely going to be easy, at least from what we're seeing now. And if you're issuing the non-qualified EAAs, I think the bar is much lower. There's no QTSP status required, and non-qualified attestations, they can't be denied legal effect solely for being electronic. So that's also defined in Article 45B. But of course, they carry less evidentiary weight behind them than a QEAA. And another thing I think is the cross-border recognition isn't mandatory. So again, it depends on the implementation on the countries. So I think this suits things like loyalty credentials, private credentials, membership badges, and anything where legal recognition does not matter so much. The EA is a great path, and it's a much easier one. It's a weaker fit for something like professional applications or any other like certification where legal recognition is the whole point. So then you actually want to do the QEAA path. There is another path which I didn't mention a lot. So if you're a public sector body issuing on the basis of an authentic source you hold, so that's a distinct category, and it's pub EAAs. That's governed by Article 45F, which I'm not going to go into here. It's also closer related to the government use cases, and that's not necessarily our audience. Just to mention that it is an option here. So I think either way, the technical requirements, it's similar to the relying party side. So your issuance service needs to produce credentials in the formats that are needed, and a technical partner can definitely help you with that. Those are SD-JWT VC and mdoc, which is just following the ARF. If we move to the wallet provider path, so this is where we kind of have to understand the trade-offs. So we already said that becoming the official state wallet is hard. It requires certification under the scheme set, and the member state has to notify the commission, and the publication on the commission list of certified wallets before the wallet is trusted across the ecosystem. So it's not meant to be easy. It's a heavy regulatory path. It's a big timeline commitment, and this is designed for the entity a member state has empowered, and not necessarily a private company. Building a private wallet is generally more accessible. So we said already, it can carry PID, that's reserved for the state wallet, but it can carry the QEAAs and EAAs. And I think it's interesting to mention Italy here, because in Italy, they are unusual, or like they're the only ones that I could find, that they mention that you can have private wallets holding state credentials as well. So I don't have any other information about other countries doing that, but it doesn't mean that they won't be. It's just Italy has already defined it in law. So there's definitely at least one that allows that. And I think when talking about the practicality of being a wallet provider, so talking about the state wallets, and I don't want to open a can of worms here, I think the question of why would you make one, like who would pay, and it's another big thing, right? But in terms of private wallets, and I have another slide on payment models. So there's different things. So if you do want to become a wallet, and again, I'll repeat myself, I think everyone should. So technology providers like Truvera, we already have wallets built to the ARF standards. So you can hold those QEAAs, you can hold EAAs, and we are already tested against the standards as well, and we have the support for the formats that we're covering. So they're not the official EUDI wallets, but they're good enough for the the EAAs and QEAAs, and they're already ready to go. So I think for a lot of organizations, when they're thinking about doing a wallet or issuing the credentials, so it's not a question whether they want to build a wallet, it's a question of how to white label an existing one, and that can be a very big difference when trying to think of it. It's not necessarily like a multi-year technical project, it's more closer to a configuration and a branding exercise, at least the way that I see it.
Yeah, that's excellent. There are a few questions on this topic. There was a question about why why can't private wallets hold the PID? And like we talked about, there's big, EUDI is all designed about protecting there's three big goals, right? One is making cross-jurisdiction flows easier. The second is making business easier to do in general. But the third is protecting the citizen's privacy. And so they're very concerned about that personal identifying data going into a wallet that could be hacked, could be owned by the North Koreans, like who knows where it is, could have a virus in it. It could be, some shady American business with a sell your data business model. So that is the strict rule is the official PID goes into the official state wallet. Now, there's a question from Ellen, which is, can private parties resolve the PID? Can private wallets improve the PID? And that is just a verifier question. Can a wallet provider also register as a verifier? I think the answer is going to be yes, but the details are still being figured out, especially since you have to say what the purpose is for which you're going to use that data. And exactly what it means to share the purpose in that role of intermediaries Agni mentioned isn't decided. So if I'm providing a private wallet, which we plan to at Truvera, we do think we're going to need to be an intermediary, and we're going to need to help our customers to be able to verify that PID in order to create derivative credentials for these private use cases. So that's the model we're trying to follow, is exactly what Ellen talked about. But the details of how we get there, we're still trying to figure out what each jurisdiction is going to do, which ones we need to be registered as a business, when do our customers who are consuming that data need to register with the government? All those questions are things we're still researching.
Yeah, exactly. I think to add to what Richard just said, I think in a lot of cases it is likely if you have a private wallet, you will need to identify your customers, and using the PID for the customer identification, the identity verification, it makes a lot of sense. So then you can derive those credentials for that. Okay.
One other question was, will states certify private wallets as being EUDI compliant? So we understand there's a certification scheme for the official state wallet, but there is not currently an official certification scheme for the private wallets. However, there are groups that plan to allow to provide that EU compliant trust mark is a private sector offering. So I think that's still emerging. I don't think there's a clear answer to what kind of certifications a private wallet could benefit from going through. But in general, it's a free continent, right? You can consume data and share data with anybody you want without the government being involved. So there's no global certification. But if you want, there's no universal certification in the EU for private wallets. But if you did want to say, hey, we're proving that we're compatible there might be a scheme to do that through one of these third-party testing, one of these private sector testing providers or non-governmental testing providers.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'll move forward. I recognize this slide was kind of just a summary of what we covered, so I actually am gonna skip this because I have a few slides that are not necessarily directly related to participating in EUDI, but I think there's things that are very important to follow. And one of the things that I want to put on everyone's radar, of course, is the European Business Wallet. So the regulation itself is still a proposal. It's in the ordinary legislative procedure, but as of last month, the Council has adopted its negotiation position. So the EU leaders have asked for a final agreement by the end of this year. So we know that it's moving, but the formal EU-wide framework and its planned trusted list of business wallet providers, so it's not in place yet. But it's important to understand, but that does not mean that nothing is happening. So the business wallets already exist in the market, and they're built to the same underlying area of standard. The WeBuild consortium, which is over 200 organizations now across 28 countries, they're actively piloting business and payment use cases like proof of representation, mandate, supply chain credentials. And that work is feeding directly into how the European Business Wallet gets shaped. So from my perspective, or what I want to convey here, that the regulation, it's still catching up, but the market is already ready. So if your organization is a B2B facing one, it's worth engaging with today already, because stuff is happening. And there's already pilots and existing providers, and rather when waiting for the law to be finalized and see what it is. In the conference that I went to, there was some, it's more like gossip than real thing, but you know, that the business wallets will actually come and get used and adopted before the personal ones, because there's just such a big need in the market, and I think a lot of people recognize that. So I wouldn't be surprised that in 6 months, when we do another webinar, it will be all about the business wallet, and the personal one will be in the last slides, just as I mentioned, right?
Yeah. Lode asks what percentage of companies in the EAA already have a digital ID and a business wallet. I think from a percentage level, it's got to be very close to rounds to zero, because I think that 200 plus organizations is everybody. It's like there's around 300 DIDs, not DIDs, 300 business PIDs, legal entity identifiers, they're calling them, in a business wallet today. They're just figuring it out.
I think it's still too early to talk about adoption and percentage, right?
And the WeBuild website has more information. They kind of accept new people, and then they close it and do their test, and then they accept new people. Last time I went to their website, they were in this phase where they were not accepting new people. So Jim, you asked how you join. You'd have to go straight to them and ask. Their website has the info.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next slide that I definitely want to show a little bit, it's more like a maybe teaser, because I think this is a this is a question we get a lot, and I think it can be a webinar in itself as well. And so also this question is like, the regulation doesn't really answer the payment models for you. So, but it's a very important question. Like we talked about the BLT, right? Who brings the bacon? So who pays whom? And broadly, we see there's three models that are circulating. So one is the holder pays the issuer. And this is close to what existing identity verification markets are today. So you pay someone to issue a credit rating score for you, for example. It's very well understood. So another one is the holder paying the wallet provider for storing their credentials. And of course, there is the holder paying the verifier. So in this case, maybe not directly, but you can think of it like a service charges someone for including their age verification in the cost of the service or a product, right? So if I'm buying a bottle of wine, the price, it will already include my age verification, even though like I don't necessarily know that I'm paying for the age verification, but it's just a part of the markup of the business running cost for the wine shop. And I think in here, and again, maybe we're a little bit biased, but the one logical missing path is then verifying paying the issuer. The way that we see the verifiers, they get the benefit from the information, and the issuers who issue the credentials, they're bearing all of the costs and the responsibility for issuing the right information. So like we have a solution for that payment model, but it's not using the EUDI compatible credential formats. So this is something that's missing. I'm sure Richard wants to add something here as well, right?
I've been part of discussions where they've tried to figure it out. They wonder if we're requiring wallets to get certified, and if certain credentials can only go in certified wallets, then maybe the wallet provides that payment model. But the trick is the legislation is very clear. The verifier should not talk to the issuer. So the verifier, in order to protect the citizen's privacy, if the verifier is not the unlinkability between the issuer and the verifier, if you have that unlinkability, then you don't have a good mechanism for getting the issuer paid. So that's the challenge with staying inside that ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think to end on this slide, so I think the point is that like eIDAS 2, they don't mandate any payment models. They want the regulation is focusing on the trust and interoperability. Sorry, after an hour, the tongue is not so good anymore. Privacy, and also, but not the commercial terms. The whole point is that it could be deliberate. It seems deliberate. So they want the commercial layer to be figured out by everyone in practice. So everyone does what makes sense for them. So deal by deal, they can do it sector by sector, and it's not settled by law. So that's one of the important questions. I think one of the first questions that everyone who wants to participate in the ecosystem, they want to answer. And, you know, we're always happy to be part of this conversation. I will not continue because I think it's a very long topic. So I had one more slide of what we're watching, but I think this is just like a summary as well. And I know we're over time. I can't believe the time went so fast. And I can't even blame Richard for talking so much, because I think I talked more this webinar as well. Thank you everyone for the questions. And if you have more, we're happy to answer them on LinkedIn or email or anywhere else. So yeah, thanks everyone.
And if you're okay for another 10 minutes, maybe we answer more audience questions.
Oh, if we have more, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just mindful that some people might be eager to get off and finish their days.
So Jean-Marie asked about the European Business Wallet. There's a bunch of questions about the WeBuild consortium. You'll have to go straight to them, but we did have them on. Nick Lambert hosted a session last December with Intesi, where they talked about that. They went through one of their pilots, so you can get more information there. So on the things we're watching, you mentioned each country's doing things a little differently. I know France has got quite far in their implementation, but they're also saying, you know, very government controlled. Everything lives in the state wallet. I know Germany is quite far with Sprint. They're the ones that talk at all the conferences and get everybody caught up. What other countries should people? What else have you heard? I know these aren't official, but like I've heard rumors that Poland's pretty close. Have you heard anything from Lithuania? Greece?
So Lithuania, I think they're building something, but it's not very public yet, so I don't have a lot of information. My personal favorite is Denmark, because I think they have a very easygoing, what you would expect from Danish people kind of approach, that everyone should be involved, and we all have decided that this is a great idea, the government issued identity, and we're all going to use it, and we're going to get everyone involved, and it's going to be a nice way to improve everyone's life. So, like, as I said, I think I mentioned this already before, but I think the French representative made fun of the Danish, that they're like the vending machine of credentials for relying parties. I think it's also interesting to mention for countries like Poland, for example, and I think maybe Lithuania falls into this category a little bit as well. We don't have necessarily like a government wallet. Poland does. We have something similar to Bank ID, which is called Smart ID. So we still have the same, like we can use our identity, it's an app in our phone to access government services. It has 98% adoption, like something crazy everyone. My grandmother uses, everyone uses it. It's very easy to use. You log into your bank, you log into everything, you know. So adoption for those countries, and I think Poland is maybe a better example, because when Polish wallet builders, they were also in this conference, they showed me their wallet. It already has, I don't know, 30, 40 additional services included with their own credentials. So how long will it take for the state wallet, if the state wallet decides to allow additional services in it? And then why, as a citizen, I would go for the state wallet if I already have one. That works, and that gives me access to a lot of different services already. So I think there's a lot of variation. As I said in the beginning, I'm a big supporter. I think it's great. I'm also very realistic. I don't think it will be necessarily a very quick path. But for me, this one thing that it doesn't have, like the current implementations from any wallets, they don't have this cross-border interoperability path. And I think for people, at least like me, that like to move around, that will be the best reason for adoption. It's just like not having, like, oh God, the amount of documents I had to translate when moving from one EU country to another, it's just insane. So yeah.
And Gotham asks exactly that. What's the incentive to adopt the state wallet? The biggest incentive will be that those cross-border flows. It also supports other use cases, like you mentioned at the beginning. It's not really our business, but the e-signature piece, the register transmission, there might be specific getting a loan or buying a house. They might say you have to use the new government wallet that does some of these additional things. But in general, Gotham, it's a good question. That's the real test of the market. When this comes available in 2027, I can see countries that don't have a digital identity today adopting quite quickly, but countries that already have a widely adopted digital identity, Poland, Lithuania, Sweden, even Italy has a fairly widely adopted one. Will citizens switch, and how do they move that? And that is the challenge that these countries have to address. So I don't think anybody has the answer to that question. Now, Pat asked, what are the 3 countries or frontrunners today? So Germany and France, I think, have done the best at getting public information, making decisions, and sharing it with the world. Spain has participated in a lot of these pilots, but they don't have a lot of, like, a one-stop place to get all the information. Outside of that, it's much more knowing the right people to ask. Denmark, Poland, Italy, we know they're making progress. Belgium, we know, has participated. Netherlands have participated in a lot of these conversations. But I haven't been able to find a website that goes in the details, at least in English. There might be one in Danish or Norwegian. Now, there was a question about the UK. The UK is a whole nother webinar. we can have Nick Lambert hosted a conversation with 2 experts on the UK system where they were talking about there's been a lot of contention in the United Kingdom about what should be the role of government and what should be the role of private sector. In general, they're more private sector leaning than the rest of the EU, than the European Union, closer to the American style, but not as far as America as far as private sector goes. And so it's been very contentious what they should do. And so you can look that up in our YouTube channel, that previous conversation, and get some clue into the debate. With the recent change in the prime minister, it'll be interesting to see if the new government continues some of the policies of the previous government on that. So I think it's all in flux. Similarly, Switzerland, very friendly to the EU, but not EU. They've got their own digital identity scheme, and it's undecided how we'll interoperate. I know there's been a lot of conversations on that topic. So that was really helpful on the business wallet and the adoption. Oh yes, then there's the question, if there's these state wallets and there's these private wallets, are people actually going to have multiple wallets? I want all of my information. I'm teasing. I want all my information in my Google wallet. Just give them all my information. Why should I have to use anything else, Agni? Why do I need to juggle 3 or 4 different wallets?
So I think this is, in a way, maybe a wrong question to ask as well. So I think that the user shouldn't need to juggle anything. Like the state wallet will be given by the state, like you have your passport, so that can live there. But the private wallets, that can already live in your existing application. So like it shouldn't, credentials and all, it shouldn't be like additional cognitive load for the users. Like we already have accounts with different companies, with different organizations. The credentials should live there and help me access and identify myself, but without me needing to think, oh, it's another key, it's another card I need to take care of. Like because it's digital, that's kind of the whole point, that I don't need to keep track of my physical card and worry about it. It's there, it does a job, and as a user, I can stay happy and oblivious to it all.
I think that's a really good example. I've got my concert ticket in my Google Wallet. I've got my bus card in like my state transit thing. I've got my company login code. I've got, I'm a parent of kids in school ID. I don't really think about these as different wallets. I just think about them as, oh, I'm going to the school. Let me bring up my school ID. So I don't think, like you said, if we're doing our jobs right, the user shouldn't have to be juggling different wallets. But in practice, they are different standards, they're different regulatory schemes, and there's different user experience. And I do agree that's the challenge we have, is how do we make this be seamless for the user? There is the Digital Credentials API I mentioned. It's an emerging standard from the W3C that's being incorporated into ISO as well into ITF or FIDO. But the process by which you query the mobile device and say, do you have a credential that does this or that? And it goes and finds the right wallet and presents that to the user. As this standard gets adopted, that should remove a lot of that cognitive load. And the Digital Credential API exists today, but one of the evolutions that's being discussed is that ability to be able to pull credentials from two different wallets and do a compound presentation together with them. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes to do that. When they did the first version of the Digital Credentials API, I can see Agni saying, too much detail, Richard. So the diff-PEC standard allowed that kind of thing. The Digital Credentials API said, no, it's too complicated. And now they're seeing why we try to do it in PECs, because it is becoming common in a lot of these use cases we foresee.
I think this is all great information, Richard, but as we want you to post more on LinkedIn, so it will make great LinkedIn posts, and my husband will not die of hunger, since it's getting quite late for me.
Yes, we are getting late. We wrap up. The one other question I think people ask, well, what about international non-European interoperability? So there's a few questions about can people outside the EU consume these credentials? The answer is unknown. You can't register if you're outside the EU. So what will that mean? I have had this discussion with people who are in these committees and said, this is really important to us. There's a conference in September where hopefully we can talk about this in more detail. There's also the question about how people from outside the EU can present their credentials inside the EU. And again, that isn't the goal of EUDI right now. The goal of EUDI is just within the EU interoperability, and we'll use existing processes for businesses and individuals outside the EU to be able to share. And I know that's complicated, but the private sector is solving that today, and hopefully we have something better in the future. Similarly, what can other countries learn from the EU to apply to their own digital identity schemes? I do know many countries come to us and say, tell us about the EUDI standards so we can adopt them. So there's definitely an interoperability effort that countries can do. But I think it's too early to know what lessons to learn. It'll be interesting to see in 2027, 2028, I think we'll have a much better idea what went well and what went poorly. India led the world with mass adoption of digital ID for citizens, and there were a lot of lessons there, good and bad. It's great that India was pioneering. I think we're going to see the same with Europe. I think there's a lot of good things that Europe is incorporated into this framework, but it's too early for me to know. I can see some concerns, and it's going to be interesting to see in practice how many of those concerns are actual and how many of those concerns don't happen in practice. I apologize for questions we didn't get to, but I love the conversation. Really valuable to have everybody. And Agni, I know you put tons of work into this. I'm glad to have an expert in EUDI on the team to answer these questions when customers come.
And I'm very thankful for you, Richard, to add all of the context that you added as well. You definitely have been longer with me and know all of the interesting historical references.
So thank you to the audience. We'll take some of the remaining ideas, questions, and think maybe these need to be another webinar. We have another webinar on wallet models you can see in our history. Maybe we need to do another deep dive into wallet models. Anyway, we'll continue the conversation online. So appreciate everybody's participation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.